Welcome, everyone, to Rivers number 4, the fourth collaborative workshop between the Canadian Music Centre and the Canadian League of Composers. We are joined today by Nick Storring, who's going to talk about, well, the title of the workshop says, getting you and your music out there, how to market yourself as a composer, how to get your music on people's radar. Nick is a cellist, composer, runs Riparian Acoustics. He's a curator, programmer, sort of hand in just about every aspect of new music that you can get your hand into. So he comes at this from a lot of different perspectives. So we're really excited to put this together. So welcome to everyone online, welcome to everyone here. I would say for folks here, obviously we'll do questions at the end, but well, if we want to turn this into a dialogue, absolutely feel free to just jump in if you have a question or a thought for Nick. And for the folks online, I'll be monitoring the Zoom chat and I can sort of be your voice, so to speak. So if you similarly have questions or want to dive in, participate in the discussion, just put a message in and I'll relay it to Nick on your behalf. So yeah, and before we get going, as we gather here today, we want to acknowledge that the CMC is in Tkaronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Tkaronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. It is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands, and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We thank the Indigenous people who share this land with us and allow us to be here as uninvited guests. The Canadian Music Centre was founded in 1959. CLC was founded in 1951, so around the same time. We were established in the context of violent state policies targeting Indigenous communities, including the potlatch ban, the 60s scoop, and residential schools. These policies were not part of some dark chapter ended and in the past, as injustice and violence against Indigenous people are ongoing. Acknowledging the land is to acknowledge that the CMC and many legacy arts organizations, including the CLC, within Canada have been part of racist policies that devalue and seek to erase Indigenous cultural expression. We encourage community members to familiarize themselves with the 94 calls to action that were released in 2015 as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report. We would also encourage you to follow some of the efforts that the CMC is taking to address these calls by viewing the webpage on our Accountability for Change and Indigenous Advisory Councils. For more info, check out the CMC website. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
All right. Well, hello everyone. I'm here to speak to you about publicity, which is sort of makes up a big component of my work these days. My primary sort of streams right now are working as a composer slash musician, and that like sort of publicity is sort of like my day job nowadays. So the one thing though that I want to address right off the top is that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is not so much publicity per se, but community. And I know maybe don't get disappointed just yet, but for me, that's like the sort of foundation for the publicity thing. And I think that some of these ideas about community need to be reinforced in order for publicity stuff to be successful. Like in my mind, publicity is about connection and visibility as opposed to power. And I think that a lot of people kind of approach it the other way. They're seeking like clout or, some sort of, it's sort of treated like almost like a currency of sorts. But I can tell you that frankly, that's going about it totally the wrong way. And I see that from experience because, yeah. So I'm going to give you a bit about my background. I started simply as a composer, I guess you could say. I graduated from Wilfrid Laurier University in 2005, moved here, got sort of involved in music and also in writing. So I started off with a blog actually, and then I sort of put that out there into the community. And very soon after that got sort of hired to do some freelance writing by MusicWorks and Exclaim. So this is a really interesting turn for me. And then later, quite a while later, the sort of journalism thing, as well as the fact that I was producing sort of DIY events, sort of turned into doing publicity. I had a person who I wrote an article about approach me and say, like, do you think you could do a publicity campaign? You do. And I've been putting out albums and stuff and getting some press and stuff. And because I was also doing music journalism, I was sort of seeing stuff come in and understanding how publicity works from that side. And so I decided to take a chance on this person, Brody West, who's an amazing saxophonist and composer. So I took a chance on him and did a publicity campaign and reached out to some people I knew and got him some pretty interesting press right away, like The Wire, Downbeat, some big things sort of came out of this, and I was really surprised pleasantly. So, and that's sort of where this started. This was 2018. So, I mean, if you look at my trajectory, and maybe I didn't go into enough detail to articulate this, but it was really about community, like I built a community through my various endeavors, and then that's what led to this publicity thing. And that's also the way I approach publicity. Initially with publicity, I was actually writing everyone individual emails. So I had a shorter list, and I would write individual emails directed at specific people. And it was kind of a lot of work and kind of nuts, but I'm actually really grateful that I cultivated that kind of foundation for my publicity work, because I feel like that kind of earned trust and a feeling like that I was embedded in this community off the top there. And so yeah, just a sec here. So this community thing, like the community at large, like we have this idea that our community is only like other musicians, other composers and whatnot. But in actual fact, I would say that our community encompasses fellow musicians and composers, audiences, critics, curators, record labels, publicists, arts administrators, funding officers, and teachers/academics. Although I would say that academia is its own community. So I guess the reason why I'm driving this community thing home so much is that something I notice a lot is that musicians have this us and them mentality sometimes when it comes to people outside of the sort of creative people within that community. It's like, oh, there's a sort of adversarial thing, like there's suspicion, like, oh, the press is out to make musicians look bad, or managers or so and so exploits musicians. And I know, like, there is some truth to that in certain situations, but I wouldn't say that that's always the case. I think in a lot of cases you'll find that people who are doing, like Joseph is a perfect example, like being a composer and working for an institution, or myself, I'm a composer, but I write for publications. I serve as a publicist for fellow artists. So I think that you'll see that quite often actually in the press, in all these sort of domains. And so I think it's really important to recognize that, because I've seen people kind of like have this like really wary idea about the press. And it's actually really toxic and kind of prevents them, like it sort of prevents this idea of community. So yeah, I think for me, the biggest, like the bedrock of all this, as I said, building community. So you're like approaching other people as though they're potentially a friend or someone who'd be interested in your work, and vice versa. So approaching, engaging this way without schmoozing, instead like being authentic and cultivating curiosity and like and that kind of thing. I think when people are transparent about wanting, like this sort of transactional thing almost, it just turns people off. And if you're going into this only interested about what this person can offer you rather than like what they're doing, that's problematic. Not problematic per se, but it's just, it doesn't, there's no reciprocity, and reciprocity is super, super important. So yeah, let me see here. So a lot of things I'm going to be talking about are things that I've observed from working with clients and also observing as a journalist. seeing what people do with publicity and like how it doesn't work well, and maybe talking, yeah, from the perspective of like what you can all do as composers and musicians and such in your work to sort of remedy some of these things. So a big thing that I see frequently among especially people in the classical and contemporary music community is there's this, again, it comes back to this whole community thing, but I feel like we're typically quite we don't do well with addressing listeners. We're better at addressing our peers, our like other musicians in the way we communicate about our work. But communicating to listeners that's the common denominator. We're all listeners. We all like to listen to music. That's why we're in this. And that's also what connects like the other people that are outside of like the sort of creative circle, the people who are doing, I mean, I shouldn't say creative circle because frankly, like journalism is also a creative endeavor. All of these things are creative, but the people generating the music, let's say. So all of us are listeners, and that's the common denominator, and that's the best way to communicate about your work. So bear that in mind when you're like writing bios, program notes, or publicity. You know, it's essential that you're framing your work in a way that's not, that gets at it deeply, but is not esoteric and not, you know, wrought with like terminology and stuff. You really want to be, yeah. So that's something that's really essential. And I think another, like related to that, I think there's this tendency within contemporary music to only think that other contemporary musicians, like, and I mean the contemporary classical sort of stream, it's getting better, but there's a lot of people who I think that they sort of only are within those circles, but really there's a whole community of other people doing exploratory musics of various kinds, improvised music, abstract electronic music. The list goes on. There's all this stuff out there. And if you're only kind of engaging with those people and only addressing those people, you really limit yourself. And the thing is a lot of these people who are doing that stuff like contemporary classical music. So it's a sort of weird one-way thing. And I also think it's kind of a self-deprecating thing. It's not like a snobbery or anything like that. It tends to be this sort of thing like, oh, no one likes, we were sort of brainwashed out of this mentality that we're sort of, people don't like us, but actually the listenership is actually broader than you might expect. So, I mean, cultivating connections with those sort of parallel kind of genres, like, you know, going to shows and like meeting people and checking stuff out online, buying records, you know, reading the press, that contributes to that kind of crossing over there and understanding that stuff. Even if it's not what you do, like just sort of curiosity is really important to this. That's another really important ingredient. Another like pervasive myth is that the contemporary classical world only like thrives within institutions. And I think institutions play a very important role. It's really great. Like I'm talking places like CMC, CLC, and universities and stuff, but it doesn't only live there. And that's an important thing to remember, because if you look at other genres of music that are kind of doing similar things or engaging with similar ideas or working in more abstract forms, they're not as institutional. And so having your sort of blinders on about what else is out there, yeah, impedes that sort of flow that's really crucial to all this. And again, related to that, I would say when you're communicating with people about your music as composers in the sort of contemporary classical world, I would avoid terms like new music, actually, because it's such if you look out there, yeah, anywhere else, new music, what does it mean? It means music that's recent. And actually there's a sort of a subconscious thing there that sort of says, well, that's the only new music that matters, which is kind of messed up. I know that we just sort of say it casually, but there's this sort of subtext So I really encourage people to avoid that. Similarly, in the improvised music community, I really hate the term creative music. I know there's like a lot of justifications for it, and I accept those things to an extent, but I also think it's sort of obscurantist nonsense, the same way new music is. Saying it's sort of, again, saying that that's the only creative music. It's like, no, like I know there's recreative music, yes, okay, but fundamentally, listeners don't talk about creative music unless they're super nerdy or musicians themselves. Like there's a lot of people who like free jazz and improvised music, and they don't know to call it creative music. It's the same with like contemporary classical or whatever you want to call it. They don't know to call it new music, unless they've been like trained to say that. So I think when you're doing publicity work or even doing a bio or any of that stuff, these are important considerations. Like, who are you addressing? To return to the topic of institutions, another thing that I would say that's really important in terms of your self-image, like putting yourself forward in terms of like, bios, publicity, press releases, anything, is you have to really stop and consider what the context you're putting that out. And if you're doing anything other than an academic thing, I would say that you don't want to overemphasize your academic connections. It's fine to say who your teacher was. It's fine to say where you went to school, but like, for instance, an award that came from a school, if you look like you're completely embedded in an academic world, you get that label slapped on you, academic. And I think that it's always a pejorative, pretty much. An academic composer, it's like, and I've seen people get sort of tagged with this without it being true. Like the music itself is not academic. It's not like Milton Babbitt mentality of like, who cares if you listen type stuff, or it's not meant to be like analyzed. It's just that people perceive them that way. And I think that, there's lots that we can do to avoid that. And I think we should avoid it, to be honest. Not that there's anything wrong with school or the academic context, or like, that's another really sort of fruitful community. And it has its own world in a sense. But if you're thinking about the music community at large, or I guess the exploratory music community is the best way to term that, you don't necessarily want to engage too much with that. And so if this is something else, I'm being a bit of a backseat driver here, but if your only achievements are academic ones in your bio, and like you literally can't find anything else, I would really encourage you to look for other ways to other channels, because that's I think that even if someone's on like a jury for like a residency or something like that, and they see only academic stuff, it's kind of a bit of a red flag. So that's an important one. Another thing about limiting outlook. I think in Canada we have a bit of a problem with being provincial about our aspirations and about our outlook. Like Canada has some amazing things. Like obviously, like there's some great media. There's like we have great resources in terms of institutions and in terms of funding and all that. But I noticed there's this tendency among composers, like especially in the sort of contemporary music field, people there to sort of like overemphasize Canadian media, and the thing with that is I get that impulse because those are people around you. You can kind of reach out and touch them or like say hello to them like physically. So it feels like that's the logical thing to pursue, and it is good to pursue it. Like I'm not saying you shouldn't, but there's also like now more than ever this sort of listenership, this audience for exploratory music of various kinds is like a diffuse thing worldwide, and there's a lot of different. It's like a worldwide network sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. It's not just like this sort of like local community. It's a even though that's very important, there's like a listenership worldwide that will engage with you if you put yourself out there. So I think it's really important to look beyond that and to seek connections with other musicians, press, all those things outside of Canada. The other reason that's good is Canada, like our sort of our media, our things, we kind of think of them as being very, very big and like essential, but a lot of people don't know about that stuff outside of Canada. So like the CBC, for instance, might carry some weight, but something like the Junos, you like, I'll get back to the Junos later, but the Junos don't carry all that much weight. And there's a disproportionate fixation with the Junos in the contemporary classical world. Not saying they're bad, and I'm not saying that like they don't have any weight. I don't mean that at all. But they're limited to a particular. You have to have that sort of perspective about it. I think it's valuable for that. Okay, another important thing that I see more among my peers than like clients, because a lot of the work I'm doing is promoting recordings, but I see a lot of people who don't make recordings. And I would argue that recordings right now are absolutely key for your visibility. It's the easiest way to get press. They're easy to share. You can put them online. You can, most recordings exist both online and like as a physical form. They're far easier to distribute more widely. So I think that's like a super, super essential thing, and people should, it's really important to consider that. So I'm going to get back to recordings, but this is sort of like a general overview of a few things that I think are important to take into consideration. I did mention bios before, that they should reflect community engagement as much as or more as training and other things. And ways to do that are like talking about, people you've collaborated with, press quotes. That shows that you, like, I don't want to put out the idea that like, oh, it's just a community. Like there is a bit of this kind of pushing yourself out there, but it's doing so within a context, I guess, is maybe the way to describe it. And so saying that you studied with someone, that's great. That's one piece of the picture, but it's like, okay, well, what kind of impact is their work making outside of that context, And so, like if you get written up, putting press quotes in your bio or your press release, like talking about, I had a client who mentioned, who's like long CV. Well, actually, sorry, I'm going to take a step back here. Whenever I write a press release for a client, I always get their longest bio possible and their full CV to look at. It may sound weird, but I don't trust people. I don't trust people to put all of their put everything out there that is actually maybe the most strategic or the most that connects them the right way. And I had someone who had worked with a pretty major person, and they didn't think to mention this at all. They're like, oh, well, it was just a small collaboration. It's like, well, what do you think that half the time someone says they've collaborated with someone, maybe it probably is a smaller collaboration, but it is noteworthy. So, I mean, I know I'm saying don't schmooze, but this is sort of the way that you do that. You're not kind of like going up and being like, hey, can you do this for me? Like, oh, I'm actually really interested in your stuff. It's not disingenuous. It's true that you collaborated with this person, and somewhere down the road, you might be that name in someone's bio. So it's not like it's not quite as it's not the same thing as schmoozing, I guess you could say. So that kind of stuff is really important. You're like reflecting connection and engagement with a broader world in anything that you're putting out there. I mean, this is a smaller observation, maybe less of a crucial one, but something I do notice in the classical world is something about photos. I think people should really, like, I would really encourage people to take photos that reflect your personality and personal interests, not just like a photo that's a headshot. You don't need a headshot. You need a photo that has your head in it, but you don't need to do like a formal headshot. And here's like, hire an artist that you like, a photographer that you like to do your headshot. It doesn't need to be the headshot person that does your headshot. Because I see a lot of stuff that looks the same. And the thing is, like, we're in a community, like the good news about branding ourselves is that we're in a world that actually privileges individuality. And we don't always take that opportunity, like, kind of like, oh, well, I should do it this way. But I think actually the best way to put yourself out there is to do stuff that reflects your work and you. And yeah, hire someone good, but you don't need to hire the person that makes you look like the other people. Same goes for graphics for your albums. You don't need to follow the sort of classical music format of having like all the information everywhere. You could do, if you wanted, you could do some sort of thing that you're like, what's this? Oh, on the spine, it's so-and-so's music. Like, there's nothing saying you can't do that. It does throw certain people off, but it also brings people in a different way, because sometimes people see all this text and they're like, whatever. There's no mystery. I think mystery is actually a really important component to like the sort of image thing that we're making music that's often, engaging with stuff that we can't quite quantify with words or other stuff. And if we leave room for that, that's actually a good thing. It serves the music. So I'm going to get into some stuff regarding publicity specifically, more specifically. For some general things. If you're doing a publicity campaign where you're reaching out to press, you're reaching out to all this stuff, it needs to start 2 to 3 months ahead of the event or the release itself. You cannot do this is like, so many people contact me like, my album's already out, can you do a campaign for me? And I say, if you really, really wanted to, but I've done this in the past, it doesn't work. The best way is to do it before, especially now. I feel like it's getting tougher and tougher. I was having a conversation with another publicist the other day and about something, and she was like, yeah, it's tough out there. And so the best way is to sort of get on it early, because the media, the editors in particular, they like to be on top of stuff. They like to be, ahead of things. They like to have that thing that they can, they're doing it on time, rather than some places don't care, but the best policy is 2 to 3 months before. You may want to reach out again within that time frame and like remind people. In fact, you probably do, but if they don't do anything, but the campaign needs to start 2 to 3 months ahead of any event or release. So another thing about this stuff is, I'm not going to discourage you from hiring a publicist, but also, if you reach out to someone on the internet effectively, that can go a long way, like a really long way. And that's how I started. I just wrote people. I didn't know a lot of these people. Some of them I knew their writing or whatever. Some of them I read their writing to find out more about them, and then I could mention that in the email. But the crucial thing is, like, we have this sort of fear of like, there's this, oh, they're way up there and I'm down here, or there's this perception of like they're my enemy. Like there's this fear around approaching journalists or radio people, and they're not scary. So some of them are jerks, but some composers are jerks too, right? So but so I think just getting over that and thinking about all these things that I mentioned before about like presenting, like how to engage them as a fellow listener. You want to level with them on that level. So I saw that you reviewed so-and-so, that person's my friend, or I love their music. I love what you had to say about this artist. You really like teased out this particular thing. That goes a long way. You're like, it shows that you've engaged with what they do, and that you have shared interests. And some of these people become like kind of friends. Like I like some of the people I engage with this way early on as a publicist have now become like people that I just sort of just chat to casually on Instagram Messenger or whatever once in a while. Yeah, I'm going to drive this home, but don't limit yourself to contemporary and classical publications when you're reaching out. You definitely want to see if people are interested in like weird music or whatever, but you don't want to be like, oh, they won't like that because they because nobody likes classical music. Only the classical people like it. So I'm only going to write to gramophone, the whole note, and like fanfare, who's going to make me pay for a review. Oh, sorry, I didn't say that aloud. We can edit that out. No, I mean, fanfare actually does not. That's that there's a lot of, the truth of the matter is like some sites now, like they have these incentives that they offer, and they do not make you they don't make you pay. They offer things that are paid, and so does the whole note, but they also they cover a lot of stuff without any of that. So but like, yeah, you don't want to just strictly approach those things, partly because it's a fairly limited range of publications, and it only gets the word out to the people who like that specific aspect of the larger music community. Also, they're flooded with that stuff, and so they're not always going to cover your work. Whereas if you approach a broader range, you like really investigate, like, okay, who covers all of this stuff? Maybe they don't cover a lot of contemporary music, but they cover, weird electronic music, other forms of experimental things, like improvised music. If they cover all those things, the likelihood of them engaging with what you do is fairly high. So, and it's worth a try. The worst is that they'll write you back. The worst is that they'll ignore you. The second worst is that they'll say, sorry, this is not for us, but, try again. Like you can't get discouraged. It's tough. And I had to learn, and I'll tell you more about how I learned soon. But you can't get discouraged about that stuff. So yeah, broaden your reach. So going specifically to promoting events, this is gonna be kind of short because post the arrival of COVID, because COVID is still around for sure. Like things were very different pre-pandemic, and I am not quite sure how to promote an event, to be perfectly frank, post that, because it's become a lot harder, and I don't know why. I still get coverage for clients that do events, but it's been a lot harder to get. Like before, I remember the first I got hired to do a festival in Halifax, and I got something to the tune of like 25 pieces of coverage for them. And it's a little easy. Halifax is a different kind of thing than Toronto. Like I think Halifax, their local media is more receptive to this kind of thing. So I got a lot of stuff in their local stuff, but I also got things in international publications. So we got 25 pieces of press. And then like now it's like doing an event, like even like a really interesting event with great programming and great artists, big sort of blowout thing. It's really hard. It's really super hard. So I don't know what the trick is. I think it's actually sort of just luck, to be honest, and timing, and not a lot of things that you can really control. You can just do it. Just make sure you do it. So don't not do it, but expecting a lot of coverage for an event is really tough. Festivals are far more likely to get coverage than events. In fact, I would say that small scale concerts or individual events, it's very unlikely that you'll get any press whatsoever. So the best route there is to hit up as many listing sites as possible. Try for the local media, and then put it out there on social media and get people to share. Engage other arts organizations to see if they'll share it for you in their newsletters or on their socials. That's the trick with events. Especially like smaller scale things. Festivals, it's different. You can probably get, a lineup announcement and an exclaim and maybe someone to cover it for a few publications, but it's super, super tough. Recordings, on the other hand, are quite a bit easier. Recordings do get coverage. So I'm going to walk through a bit of the things about So we're getting close to time though, hey?
Don't have a strict timing.
You don't have a strict time? Okay.
You know,
I'll finish this then.
do you.
Okay, that's good. I don't want to. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I mean, we don't want to stay here till like 5.
No. But I'm going to go over one, and then we'll do questions.
Yeah.
Probably.
Okay.
So, recordings, yeah. Recordings, as I said, are like a really super crucial thing for like your visibility in general. There's a whole process with them. Of course, it's the funding thing, but I'm going to leave that out because that's a separate thing altogether. Although grant writing, I think it's safe to say that writing grants, all that other stuff applies. You want to, the people sitting on your juries are not all, they're not all classical people. And so when you write a grant, which is also something I do as for clients on occasion, I'm trying to move away from it because it's a lot of work, but emphasizing the whole breadth and like connections to a lot of different things. And that can also be other art forms too, I should mention. That's really, really, really good. If you look like you have a collaborative mentality and like that you're engaged with a bunch of different people, that looks good. That can never hurt. So yeah, with back to recording specifically. So a big thing that I see, as I mentioned before, leave time in your plan for publicity, 2 to 3 months before the release date. Like it should not be any shorter. I mean, sometimes it is shorter, but it's better to be 2 months, 3 months. If you're engaging with a publicist, contact them well before you want to promote the work. Give them 6 months in advance of that 3 months, ideally. Like hit them up as soon as you know you're doing the recording. Like hit them up and see, I'm going to be done recording this at this time. At which point I'm going to, send the artwork off and get it manufactured. Like that's the time that they should be starting. It's like when it's going to the factory. That's the publicist. That's when they're going to start. So you want to make sure that they're available well before. Because I've had a few people that like are proposing something really great, and I've had to turn them down because I'm too busy, and I want to work with them. The people who I'm like, oh, this is like really awesome music, but I can't because I'm just booked up. Sometimes I ask people to move their release dates, but that doesn't always go well. But that's actually another thing is if you can be flexible with your release date, it's better. Another little note about publicists, they're not miracle workers. They're people who have cultivated skills around writing and communication and have researched the media landscape and have made meaningful connections with people in that world. It's always like a work in progress, and they largely cannot guarantee coverage in particular media outlets. They can do their best. That's like, they're just doing their best. It's more about like the time we've put into like researching and like, cultivating the connections. So that stuff is always really super finicky. And I know it's disappointing if you don't get coverage in a particular thing, but there's a lot of different factors that govern why something gets coverage over others. And like a big factor is the volume of stuff that's coming out. And right now there's a lot of stuff coming out. So if someone gets like 5 reviews, that's pretty darn good. Labels are a vital part of the community. There's a lot of different models for labels, but I would strongly encourage anyone putting out a recording to at least investigate labels and like really investigate them in terms of their distribution, what they, try to find out whether they're a pay to play thing, because that impacts your budget. Look around and see if their artists are getting reviewed. So research those things. And then in terms of like researching them from approaching them point of view, what I always tell people is research artists that feel like adjacent to you, that are kind of, maybe they, like if you're just starting out and you don't have anything out as a recording, maybe someone who's like fairly emerging, that that you feel like they're kind of approachable. Like I'm talking about an artist, look into their output and see who's put out work by them. And so you do that with a bunch of people sort of that are kind of like, you know, they're not like the person that's the sort of rock star in that particular domain, but people who are like, oh, you know, and especially people who are doing stuff that's like relevant to what you're doing. So you research them, you can use like Bandcamp and Discogs to sort of look that up. Like if you go to a Discogs page, it lists someone's output and the label that they put it out. Some of those labels might be Toast. I would say like look at like 2018 to recently, not before that necessarily, unless you know for sure that label is still active. When you're reaching out to a label, yeah, but like oftentimes the people who own them are, again, musicians, or they're always listeners. So you can approach them like they're just people like anybody else. Some of them are, you know, there are people who run labels who are knobs out there who are, you know, like they're interested in gatekeeping more than they are in like stimulating the community, but they're few and far between. Most people, labels are very curatorial though, so the people who run them tend to be like, okay, this fits with the label or doesn't, and that's okay. They're not. That's actually a good thing. If you feel like some alignment with a label, prioritize them first, because they're like, a label by definition has to be curatorial, and that's what it's an entity. If it's perceived as an entity in the sort of journalistic realm, that's a good thing, because people like, even if what you do is like a little bit off kilter from that. Like for instance, I'm on a label, I've had several releases on a label called Orange Milk, based in the US. They're kind of known for this like super kind of very like internet-y electronic music that's very kind of, yeah, like a lot of references, a lot of kind of like very gestural kind of crazy stuff. They have great visibility. What I do is very different from that, but it does somehow align with what they do, I guess, to them. They also have a very distinct graphic design style that makes them immediately recognizable. That's a good thing. So yeah, when you're approaching these people, look for connections on that label with them. Like, oh, look, my friend has a release on here, or look, someone I know, or someone I opened for, or whatever, or someone who I just like is on there. I really admire this person's work. That's an in. That's your in. It's like a lot of labels release people who they don't know. I've only been, let me see here. I've been on like probably 5 or 6 labels, and I've only met the people who run Orange Milk out of all of those in person. Yeah, actually at all. Like I've never met them physically, aside from the 2 guys who run Orange Milk. So yeah, and I also don't, they're not people local. These aren't local labels. They're like people from abroad mostly. So yeah. Physical copies, very good. Very, very good for the media and for fans and for people remembering. There's a sort of weird, I know that like streaming is really big these days and it's important, and I'll just jump quickly to my little disclaimer. Oh no, I'll go to that later. So physical copies, I would very much recommend putting them into your plan. CDs take very little time to make, and that's still the dominant format in contemporary music. They take 2 weeks to manufacture usually, and they're relatively cheap if you seek out the right manufacturer. I would recommend doing it with real CDs as opposed to like replicated CDs as opposed to duplicated CDs. The surface of both looks sort of the same, but you turn the one over and it's blue, which is a CDR, doesn't last as long. And if you're investigating like distribution of any kind beyond, like I know that some labels have built-in distribution, like Centerdiscs has Naxos distribution, but like there's other labels that might not have distribution and you might go it on your own. But a lot of places don't, like they're picky about CDs, and they're going to be even pickier about CDRs. Like some people will say like, no, I don't take CDR releases. So real CDs are more expensive by quite a bit. I'd say 4 times, 5 times, 3 times. I don't know. But yeah, they last longer and they're more. LPs are very expensive and take a very long time. I don't know if anybody's tried to do this, but it takes probably 6 to 8 months to get an LP pressed nowadays. And there's a whole process behind it. You have to get a different master to have it pressed, which can take a lot of back and forth. There's the whole process of listening to test pressings. They give you 10 records and you have to listen to all of them and be like, oh, I hear this glitch on all those records at this exact same point. There's a problem with the pressing, make a new plate. Like it's a very annoying process, but people love vinyl. I mean, they really do. They're also far more expensive to mail. CDs are very cheap to mail. In Canada, you can slip a CD, especially when it's not in a jewel case. You can slip 5 CDs in a padded mailer, put one of those 194 stamps on it and send it within Canada, and you won't get it sent back to you. Jewel cases, maybe 2. A record will cost you $20 to ship within Canada, roughly. So, but sometimes this is the thing. This is why you want a label involved. Some labels pay to have the vinyl pressed if they really like your work. They're really supporting your work. So you don't have to worry about that. Tapes are cool too, but they're kind of the outlier. People, it's sort of a more specific audience, I think. So, and they're also not as cheap or as light as you'd think. So mailing them can be expensive when sending it abroad. If you do an LP or cassette release, I always recommend making 50 CDR copies to use as promos. A lot of media outlets require physical copies. You don't want to be mailing your vinyl there, which costs $20 a cent, and the cost of the actual disc per disc is like $15 to $20. They might like some people will ask for that, and you weigh it. Certain people, it's worth it. Like there's this one guy that I deal with who writes a column for, what magazine is that? It's like one of those big older rock magazines, actually, like Mojo or Uncut or something like that. And he writes a vinyl column for them, but he also loves weird stuff. And so if he asks for vinyl, you send him the vinyl and he writes it up, which is good. But he doesn't take advantage of that. He like asks when he's interested. So anyway, in the contemporary classical realm, single composer recordings tend to get more coverage than multi composer recordings. I don't know why that is. I feel like as a listener personally, I tend to gravitate more also to that. And I think that might be part of the reason is that I think people are, when they're getting a recording, they're looking for a kind of continuous experience or an immersive experience, like and developing a relationship with an artist. So if you're doing something that's a compilation of different artists, it's really prudent to be really curatorial about your choices and using your ears first rather than extra musical ideas, unless these extra musical ideas are really transparent because of the music. But like, it's really important to think about that stuff. I think it's more crucial than a recital, because a recital, for instance, it's designed to be digested once, whereas a recording, you're going to sit down with it and ideally listen to it multiple times. So yeah, like recordings are a very different medium, and that's an opportunity that you don't have with live concerts. So you don't always need to, I mean, this goes for both cases, but you don't always need to represent a ton of different contrasting styles. Sometimes the continuity is far preferable. I'm thinking about there's composers who are very consistent in their style, but some of those, a great example is Linda Catlin Smith. Her music, I'm not going to say it doesn't all sound the same by any means. But she has a very specific style. It's slow, it's relatively quiet, it's fairly lyrical. So consequently, her albums are kind of consistent throughout. There's going to be variation in instrumentation, but I would argue that's part of the reason why she's had such a huge boom in her work internationally, is because people understand it. Okay, this is, it's gonna be more of that really cool thing that I really like. The fact that she's consistent in her approach doesn't make it any less engaging. It's what draws you further in to the music. So if you're putting together a disc and you're like, oh, I need a fast piece, I need a slow piece, I need a loud piece, I need a quiet piece, you don't necessarily. You could do another example, actually, that's a multiple composer thing that's that I worked on the campaign for is Tim Brady has that quartet called Instruments of Happiness. And he had a disc last year called Slow Quiet Music in Search of Electric Happiness, I think it was called. 4 composers, 4 works for electric guitar quartet. The thing is that the pieces were all composed for a very specific scenario during the pandemic. They put on a virtual concert in this church in Montreal with a 15-second reverberation time. And so the pieces were all designed with that in mind and kind of adopted a specific approach. Like it was more, and the guitarists were spatialized within the church. So that produced a sort of consistent and audible sort of like thing across the 4 pieces, but the pieces are also quite varied, but it makes for a very satisfying listen because it's got that nice balance of like, you don't know what you're gonna get, and also you do know what you're gonna get. So it's not really a publicity thing, but it's an important thing to consider when making a record, because often you do see things like, oh, I have 10 works, I want them all recorded, boom, here's my album. People sequence it appropriately, but maybe that's not always the best approach. Maybe it's better to think about, especially when you're kind of competing in a sense for visibility. I mean, I don't want you to think of people, you're not competing with your peers, you're competing with, the music is vying for the same space as others. So it's not really a competition, but like in terms of like grabbing the attention of listeners and of the press, that could be advantageous. Another thing with recordings, Bandcamp, it's your friend. It's very much your friend. Don't listen to people that talk about it being bought by Epic Games. I mean, do listen to them, but don't let that discourage you from using it. It's a great platform. It's designed for artists to profit, and labels, small labels. Also, they hire really great, top-notch journalists to write about the music on the platform. And there's a social dimension to it too. There's like reviews from listeners, and it's like it shows like if you can click on there's little squares. I don't know if you may all already know this, but like the people who buy the record, it's little squares that link to their profile, and you can see what else they bought. So if you consistently see a certain icon on recordings, and you're wondering who this is and what else they bought, or you have like a friend or someone who you secretly really love their music taste. Like I went and sniffed around on Martin Arnold's Bandcamp page to see what he bought, because I'm like, what is, I really anything he's recommended to me, I love. So Bandcamp is great for all those reasons. Sure, let's all be wary about Epic Games and their encroachment, but for now, it's still fundamentally it's very much rooted in a community sort of sensibility. The staff, the people who do stuff there seem really cool. They also recently unionized, I'm pretty sure. So on the other hand, yes, streaming is evil. I mean, yes, Spotify, it exploits musicians. There's no 2 ways about it. It's a totally different thing. Streaming on Bandcamp is different. Streaming on Bandcamp does not make anybody any money. It's just there to sample, so you buy the physical product or the digital download. But yeah, so Spotify, whatever, it's pretty gross, pretty slimy. However, I would not recommend that people take that stance of boycotting it, per se. You can make that choice. It's all up to you. I think I do fundamentally disagree with how they run their business. The unfortunate part is that Spotify and Apple Music, etc., they're great for visibility. Great tools for that. And I think a lot of people, certainly the way I use Spotify is that I listen to stuff on there and then I go buy it. I even do it in the record store. I'm like, oh, what's this? This new release from this person. This looks really cool. Never heard of them before. I was just in Norway, and you can buy really weird music at the mall there, I found out. some great small labels from Norway, like Hubro. I highly recommend checking out the label Hubro. I was, at a mall record store. There were all these Hubro releases I've never seen on vinyl, on CD. I was in heaven. How am I going to figure out what they sound like? I pull out my phone and I listen to it on Spotify, and then I made some informed purchases. So that's one reason to have, and it's easier to do that than Bandcamp. And the Bandcamp the app is not designed for streaming. It's not designed for streaming music that you don't own. It's designed to like hold your collection and you listen to that almost. So there's convenience with Spotify. There's also visibility. If you get on an official playlist curated by Spotify or any of them, like whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, trying to think of some of the other ones that
Amazon.
This is what? Tidal. There's another one that and it's not QO Buzz. It's another sort of smaller one that's kind of a little more.
Google Play.
No,
That is a thing.
it is. No, it is. It actually is Tidal. They do. I don't know if all of them do those like artisanal playlist things. I think I know Apple Music, Spotify, QO Buzz, and Tidal do it. So, but if you can get yourself onto one of those things, it's actually really good for your visibility, and it does translate into people buying the record and actually. So, I would say do the streaming thing, but another caveat: do not pay to be on a playlist. If someone is selling being on a playlist, it's probably a scam. The only paid playlist thing I would say that's worth your while is services like there's like Groover, Muso Soup, Submit Hub, which are like basically you're not paying to be on a playlist, you're paying for people who are kind of like independent journalists sometimes and playlist curators and whatever to listen to the music, and it's a nominal fee per thing, and I believe many of them refund you if they don't listen or something like that. So I haven't done a lot of that kind of stuff, but it isn't like paying to be on a playlist, which is garbage. Those things are actually a lot of the free get on a playlist things is just like a spam thing. Whereas these things actually, they go to like official websites and go to official curators. They also have like the people have ratings too, so you can see how much they're trusted among people who have submitted music to them, I think. And like they have a score, at least on Submit Hub they do. So also Spotify for Artists is your friend if you decide to use Spotify, because it allows you, they have a function there to submit forthcoming work. So if you have a release coming out, go there and you can submit it for playlist consideration. Not a lot of people know this, but it's, it doesn't mean you're going to get on it, but like it's there, and it's their official playlists, which, as I said, they do have clout. Like you do have a noticeable amount of people who are hearing your music from those. Okay, another thing for recordings, the Junos. Don't fixate on them. I've had a lot of people, this is not a call out to clients, but I've had a lot of people approach me wanting to change their release plan to accommodate that window where you can submit to 2 Junos. And in certain cases, that could be advantageous. For instance, I don't even know if she did that though. I worked on Becca Sims' wonderful LP out there, the furthest left record there with the gorgeous Dan Tapper artwork. She'd had like 2 Juno mentions leading up to the release of this, and she won a best composition with something from there. So it made sense for her. But like if you've never been like I've never had a situation like that where you've been like shortlisted for the Junos, I would say you don't want to cut your press, like you don't want to sacrifice press coverage for a Juno award or a shot at 2 Juno awards potentially. It's better to like have the full 2 to 3 months to get the coverage, because that coverage can actually inform like these jurors are not just like floating in space and they're not just listening objectively. You're gonna be like, oh, I've heard of this album. It got great reviews and the blah, blah, blah. Let me like investigate. Let me listen with more of that. They listen with that through that filter. So the other thing to remember is Junos sadly only carry weight within Canada for the most part. A lot of people abroad don't know what a Juno is. It's important to put that in perspective. It doesn't mean that they're not, it's not good to get one. It doesn't mean that, it's not an achievement. It's very much an achievement. But any of these kinds of awards, it's important to put them in context. And, it may not be the thing that puts you out there. And it may not get you the notices. It may not expand your profile to the people that really want to hear your work, even if it does, even if you are successful. So that's some stuff there. My final category is a category where I'm going to be very frank that I'm not a total expert on it. But I do think I have enough experience to make some remarks about it. That category is social media. So yeah, I don't usually engage in this side of things as a publicist. But the main reason I don't is actually because I feel I strongly believe that social media, because of its design, you don't want someone else doing it for you. You don't want someone else ghostwriting your social media posts. It's better done in your own voice and where you're the protagonist. So certainly I can I do offer to help with making little assets. I've done some little videos for people, or I've done where I've taken their album cover and done little animations with it, or I've proofread longer posts or that kind of thing. I've offered advice, but I pretty much don't like the idea of doing that stuff for people, because as I said, I think that when you see stuff that's done on someone else's behalf, it's very transparent, and people disengage. They're like, that isn't the work of this person. I mean, I'm thinking about you're a great example actually of someone who does social media really successfully, because you have a very specific thing that you do, a very specific practice, and you realize that, and you very clearly understand the potential that has from an audiovisual point of view. And so you're tailoring your social media in a genuine way. You're also not steering it too much to make it social media friendly. You're doing it, it feels very genuine and authentic, and that's the balance you want to achieve. You want to maximize social media, you want to make stuff find aspects of what you do that are exciting for that medium, but you fundamentally don't want to just be caught doing things for social media attention, because that stuff gets really boring after a while. I don't know if you look at any instrument on Instagram once, you'll get all this suggested content that's just people doing novel things with that instrument over and over again. And while it doesn't hurt to be pulled into that by chance, you don't want to be just doing that. You want to actually be doing stuff that's this is what I do as an artist, and here's an excerpt of that. That's also what I like about what you do, is you're not this is 9 tips to something on the harp. It's here's what I do. I'm doing this thing later. Come check it out. Here's a sample, and you do reveal parts of your process, but it's not this kind. It's not about you don't have a pristine white table and tape recorders all lined up in a perfect thing, and then you're doing this mundane sounding shit. The what you're doing is sonically engaging, and because a lot of this stuff, it's there's some really interesting stuff out there, people doing really interesting techniques, and it is musically satisfying, but there's a lot of stuff where it looks good and just it doesn't matter how you're making it. It's who cares if you put 20 Walkmans on a table in a perfect straight row and used some artisanal tiny synthesizer that you bought off of Etsy. It doesn't sound like good music. It sounds just like any other person using Ableton Live, for instance. Why go to that trouble? Make it about what you already do, not about like let people into what you do, not create stuff for people to engage with you, hoping that they'll engage with you authentically, because they probably won't. Another good like thing about social media, like I'm thinking a great example of this is he's taking it well beyond social media, but the Canadian composer who lives in France, Samuel Andreev, he has some really great like he does interviews with other composers on his YouTube channel and does a podcast. And he's cultivated a really great thing around that. And it's sort of more about his interests. And you know, he does plug his own music, but it's kind of like this thing that kind of has more to it than just like, this is me. And I think that's another really important thing too, is like use your social media to lift up your community, share work and accomplishments by your friends, because they'll do the same. If someone includes you on a mix for, you know, on like, you know, I don't know, what's it called, radio? All I can think of is NFT radio, which is not what it's called. Geez, I can't think of it. There's like NTS. There's like these like sort of online radio stations where people do guest mixes, and they're quite visible, and there's like a lot of stuff around them. If someone includes you on that, wait a minute, no, I'm going the wrong way here. Well, no, but okay, if you make a mix for that and you put it out there, tag everyone, and then they can share it, and because it shares what you're doing, but also shares them, and like you create this. It's great to make a space on your social media for people who are like-minded and who you admire and who may in turn like your work. It's also a good way to catch people's ears who are fellow, you know, peers in the community, like that you don't know personally. Like there's been countless times where I've, you know, had like a kind of like little brush with someone on social media about something, and then I go listen to their work and I'm like, oh, this is really, really killer work, you know. And I share it on my stories because I think it's a good thing. And then, you know, you find that they'll share it and other people will share it, and it's actually that's a good way to get stuff out there. Also using social media as a tool to make connections like beyond that, like engage with people in the comments and DMs, because sometimes you meet really interesting people that way, people that you meet in real life. Like I was just in Stockholm and I posted a comment. This artist Fenez was playing there the night before I got there. I was like, damn it. And I was at the venue right at the studio, right beside the studio where I was doing residency. Like, damn it, I wish I could have seen this show. I'm coming tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know why I wrote that. I mean, it's sort of a stupid, I mean, but funny thing is a guy that used to run a label in the US, this guy, Maxwell Croy, used to run this label, Rootstrat, a really great, you know, abstract electronica label. He got in touch, was like, oh, you're coming over? Let's have a coffee. And so we ended up meeting up 2 times and, you know, exchanging records and having a great chat about all sorts of things. And that's never a bad thing, like those types of things. So
I'm just going to jump in.
Yeah.
I have been informed that there is actually a time limit
of
1:30.
1:30? Okay.
So
where are we at here?
If you want to,
Yeah.
if you want to wrap it, and
Yeah.
I've got 2-ish questions
Okay.
in the chat, and then if people have questions, by all means.
One final thing about social media: don't obsess over follower-following ratios. It's fruitless. And when you delete people, so you have like 26 people you're following, you just look like a social climber. So, as opposed to someone who's like open to like engaging. Anyway, yeah, questions.
Okay. I'm gonna just jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So one is a practical question. From, you were naming some playlist services that you like. Muso was one. Can you repeat the other ones just for?
Well, I'll be clear. I don't like them, but they're not. I'm neutral about them.
They're not predatory.
They're not predatory. So that's big disclaimer there. But Muso Soup, Groover, Submit Hub.
Muso Soup.
Yeah, it's a weird name, but like, you know, you pay like $1 US or $2 US for basically for people to like evaluate something, whether something is relevant to their. It's very singles driven though too, which is doesn't always serve people in this community.
The other question was about the album making process, which
Yeah.
I think you sort of got into in terms of track selection. If you think there's a lot of interesting composers about this, like how to literally go about making a record, which I think is maybe beyond what we have time to get into now. But if you want to speak to that for like a couple minutes of like where you start. But this is a topic we're going to get into in much greater detail in a future webinar.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start because I don't know this person's it varies from person to person. My own practice is divided between like making like multi-tracked instrumental stuff that I record at home and writing for ensembles. I have like a couple ensemble things kind of on the go, but like in very slow-mo. And essentially it's just like working with people who support your work in a studio context. And choosing a good studio, getting a grant is really crucial in those cases. So yeah, I mean, I can't really get it's too much of a big thing. I would talk about it, but I'm also not the expert. There's a lot of different ways to make a record. You can also, I actually made a cassette release in this room with a group. This was like one of my first releases, a quintet. We were like reading this graphic score that I'd made in a piece by Daniel Brandis, who's like a Victoria Bundelweiser composer, and we released that. But we recorded in this room. Pretty much did like a few takes of the same piece, but it was recorded like directly to sort of two, like it was just like stereo recordings, but with multiple microphones, but like a stereo recording that was then we mastered it and released it. So you can do it a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be like an expensive studio thing. You can get a good recording if you know someone who knows how to record well and have a good space to do it in.
I had a question because you mentioned a lot towards the beginning of just this cold calling and reaching out and building community, and then
The what? Sorry.
and then you mentioned the recent your beginning of how you became a publicist.
Yeah.
You did a lot of like cold calling, cold emailing.
Yeah.
And then now working as a publicist, you kind of receive those things.
It was more like that. I used to receive those things as a journalist
Okay.
beforehand. I actually was hounded to death by someone who wanted me to review a CD of Sousa marches, and I have no idea where they got the idea that I would review this for MusicWorks, but I didn't respond to the email because I just didn't have time. And then they wrote me again. I meant to write them back, but forgot. Then they tagged me on Twitter,
Oh, no.
and I wrote them back an email saying, "Don't do that. Like, please don't do that. That's embarrassing." And it's also like, it's also kind of weird. And like, if you're not getting an answer from me, like look up what I'm writing about. I'm not writing about Sousa marches.
Yeah.
So the cold calls are from that. But anyway, your question. Sorry, I
No.
bulldozed your question.
It's always a good side note. I was wondering if you had any like tips for like what's been successful and how you approach cold calling versus what's not been successful, like how you structured those interactions.
Yeah. I can tell you about that, but I also have a disclaimer about that and a story to accompany it. So as you can probably tell by the way I'm describing the way I work, I try to be very mindful of my interactions with people and respectful of people, and I try to like approach it from a point of view of I'm asking them to do something, and I want to at least demonstrate that I've done my due diligence to sort of like assess that they're probably someone who would respond to this, and etc. So I tend to sort of I tend to try to like project being personable in the email. I'm like, "Dear so-and-so, how's it going?" Maybe I say like, "Greetings from Toronto," or I mention where they are and ask them a question related to like something I've observed in their work, or just like, but kind of small talky almost. Because I feel like it's good to project being friendly, especially if you actually do have a demeanor. You want to like, you want to be affable and open. So that's a key, is like sort of projecting an openness, I guess. And then also I think it's good to like introduce yourself briefly, but why you're reaching out, contextualize it, and especially contextualize it in a frame that's sort of specific to this person, or this outlet. So say I'm approaching, you look at someone who recently reviewed something that you thought, oh, that record is kind of related to what I do. So you mentioned that, and you mentioned like you can even say like, I really liked how you talked with this particular feature of the artist, because I don't feel like others are zeroing in on that, or just anything like that, like anything that captivated you from what they do. So there is a bit of a kind of process involved. You do have to like do a bit of research, but it doesn't take long to read a record review, usually. So I would do that, and I would keep it fairly brief, but it doesn't have to be super brief. What I used to do is you can do two different things in terms of like attaching the material. Like you can either like make a press release and send them a PDF, or you can like have like something that you link to. It's good to offer something that has an option to like stream or download. I now use a service called Disco, which is not too expensive. And I use it to like, it actually has sort of like a MailChimp type thing built into, like a crappy MailChimp built into it, but it's good. It's not crappy, I shouldn't say that. It's just like a lower, it's not as many features as MailChimp, sort of built into it, and you can store contact lists there, and you can store music there. So I store all my clients' music there, and it makes a little page that you can kind of looks like a Spotify page, but it has a blurb up top. And then I can store audio, video, images, press release on that page, and they can link to it. They can click it and view it or stream it or whatever, or they can download it, and you can download it in MP3 AIF. I feel like that's a really good option, and you do have to pay for it, but I find it better than, okay, here's a Google Drive link, and here's a SoundCloud link, and then here's the press release. It's just like one link, boom, and you say you can find the press release there. So that's what I would say. I mean, there was another part to your question that wasn't there?
No, I think you kind of covered it.
I was gonna mention the thing about the cold call thing. Being too fearful of cold calls can be bad. I remember there was this writer that I had in my database for a long time, didn't contact them ever, and then the first time I did like a mass mailing with Disco, I was like, oh yeah, I'll just put them on this list, and then they got back to me, but I was always like, I don't know, So sometimes that filter that you have in your head isn't always right. Like I always try to be like super respectful. I don't want to bug people with things that don't interest them. I've gone the other way by accident too, but you can't predict everything. James, you were waving your hand?
Well, yeah, I was just sort of wondering about something. I was talking to someone who's more in the film industry about the sort of like cold calling stuff.
Yeah.
And they're like giving someone your sample or whatever is like kind of it's like considered rude, and like
a journalist or like another director or something.
Usually a creative, because I'm thinking like as a composer, we're often trying to like pitch ourselves to performers, ensembles, and groups, and they're like
different.
Usually it's better to ask like, can I send you something? Because that's more polite. I actually have found that's good, because like then you get a response from them. But
this is the thing, is people in the media, actually there's a lot of people who say, do not ask me if you can send me something, just send it.
Mm-hmm.
Because because of exactly what you're saying, it feels like you're seeking a response from them, and they don't have that much time.
Yeah.
A lot of these media outlets, a lot of them are just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're just like music fans who want to, so it's better to just keep it with the media. That's true. With labels, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I've seen a lot of people who get responses from labels just doing the one email link. I think it's different. I think the film industry is very different.
I do know of one production company that specifically does not take cold calls from composers.
Oh, well, yeah.
Specific
film industry, you mean?
A specific instructor that like any composer who says like, here's my work, please consider it, junk mail.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're thinking about that, like cold calling ensembles, composer, I mean, I would approach like ensembles and performers and such more of like striking up a conversation with them, like rather than like immediately, here's my thing. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not really speaking too much to that. I'm thinking more about